I want to lead in with a sort of open proposition, a question that I think might be an undercurrent to this conversation between a curator and an artist, which is whether artists or designers even need curators anymore. And certainly they don't need or shouldn't need a curator to make the work itself, right? So what do curators do? And it seems for me that curators exist institutionally in one way, but that independently they often have an inquiry of their own, what matters to them, a separate reason to exist, and some idea they are pursuing alongside the artist. And sometimes this vision is not perfectly aligned with how the artist may see their own work. So I'm interested in where the edges have been for you, Juan, in this work of attaching reason to emotion, which is what I think curators and writers often do, and what curation can do perhaps that art or design cannot do on its own, and how they are necessary components of the same project. And then to set the foundation, I think, for this talk, I wanted to have a question for Brian, if you don't mind starting us off. Both Juan and I are interested in the title of your exhibition, Common Center of Mass, and how this relates to the pieces in the show and also your larger body of work. But I am particularly interested in your decision to not show any functional work in this exhibition. And certainly you have a long artistic practice in installation as well. But what felt important for you at this moment and in this context, whether personally or conceptually, to present an exhibition that was only non-functional pieces?
Thank you, and thank you guys all for being here. So common center of mass, right, in physics and orbital dynamics is two celestial bodies. They, one doesn't just orbit the other, they orbit around their common center of mass, right? And that's the real definition, but for the show being the title, I was more thinking about how arts and science kind of share a common center of mass, right? They used to be kind of lumped together throughout history, arts and sciences. But for me, it's actually more literal, right? It's more like using science and physics and mathematics and things as a starting point, right? I don't like to go too deep into the explanations of it because it's not why. It's just in essence, a starting point of something I appreciate, something I'm a kind of a nerd about. And using that as a starting point to inform how I come up with processes and forms and materials and things and present things. So it's really just that, right? It's really a literal, kind of analysis of using science to inform art, right? So that common center of mass, and that's kind of, and then to expand on why. I've done like 4 shows in the last year, and all of them were only sculpture, non-functional work. I started in art when I was like 19 as an art assistant, art installer, fabricator for many years, and then consciously made a shift into architecture and design. But I'm mostly self-taught, so I just felt more comfortable because I was a builder, and worked in construction my whole life, and a fabricator and welder. So I've just kind of gravitated to architecture and design in my 20s from art because of that. I just felt more comfortable. And then my design practice kind of matured earlier, I guess, because of that. And my kind of, first, success or whatever, or whatever you want to call it, it was in design. And so it's only in the last few years since moving to Mexico and having kind of a broader freedom, I like, other people have talked about this. There's a kind of thing in Mexico where it's not so rigid in the rules of the art world and stuff. You can just kind of raise your hand and say, I'm doing this, So I like that kind of freedom that does not, rigid. So the last few years, I've been really thinking more and more about art on the art side, you know what I mean? And to me, they have the same kind of intention. They come from the same places. I think the distinctions are important between the two, but they come from the same place. So I've just been exploring that more. I'm still designing. I'm still, doing spaces and still doing all of it. But it's just in terms of exhibitions and exhibiting work, I became more interested in exhibiting art and sculpture than exhibiting design, because I think an exhibition with design is a bit trickier out of context, or, so that's kind of why, I guess, that.
I think that leads in perfectly to this question of sort of thinking through what that distinction is, right? Whether or not it's a hierarchy, whether or not how that categorical, if it's a historical construction. I mean, I think for me, one of the things in this current moment that's been really fascinating in thinking about design and art has been that you see design more and more, especially since the time when we started MASA. And I remember so much, right, having so much to justify our existence, right, as a project that sort of straddled the two. And I would throw craft into this also, that you see more and more design taking on some of these conceptual inquiries that are more commonly associated with art. So questions of non-function, questions of form. And then at the same time, that art has, I don't think it's a revival. I think that current has always been very important in art, but this expectation that it have a strong critical perspective, or that it offer a really strong educational valence, of legibility. And so that seems to me like that also is sort of an abdication of this idea of function, right? That art has to present what it's trying to say in a clearer way, and some of that abstract quality has moved over into the explorations of design. But I'm interested for you, Juan, in what you might see as some of the distinctions as they exist now, because certainly that the distinctions also between design and art, I think, are shifting as our conceptions of design shift also.
Yeah, I was having two thoughts. One was very simple. I wonder when this idea of non-functional design came up. It's not very old. From what I remember, design was functional until the 1980s, or it wasn't design.
Well, it's still, I mean, to me, that's the defining line, is function. Yeah. Like design has to be functional.
So then tied to that is the fact that as we were looking at your show, I was thinking there's no way you can approach this from a design perspective. You have to look at it from an art perspective. So I guess there is a distinction in my mind. I'm not sure I can explain it, but when I go through Brian's show, I have to. There are all these references to minimalist exhibitions in the 1980s. You know, you have like a Carl Andre at the entrance, and then a Robert Morris, and then all these references that actually come from welding and labor. Mm-hmm. You know, like that was the big thing back then. So in a way, your language, or you found that language that appeals to your language, which is a language of someone whose trajectory comes from making things, hardcore things, you know, just like building houses, not just, you know.
Yeah.
And so you have to look at it as art, or from the point of view of art, and then what does it mean to do? What are you doing then, as someone who's looking at the show? You know, all these comparisons have to become relevant in the way you appreciate the work. You know, and then. So that's one thing that I find, and it's just the experience I had. I'm not going to develop this further because I don't really have a clear thought about it. I just realized that it would make no sense to try to decode all these things from a purely design point of view, because it doesn't seem to me to be something that is made from the perspective of design. It's just someone who was a constructor and worker, became a designer, and now is doing art. This is how the progression, it seems, from, you know, this is my... And then the other thing is what we were discussing a few days ago about art and design. It's been a very interesting discussion that, I mean, when I first came into it was through Maria Lind, who's this famous curator from Sweden, who had done a show called What If? Art on the Verge of Design. And this was her attempt at pointing at that distinction. There were a lot of artists like Liam Gillick and many other, Angela Bullock, who were doing these works that were borrowing from design and then incorporating design features into their work. So they were kind of functional, but the whole point was that they were dysfunctional in a way. Angela Bullock made some street lamps that would turn on and off at odd times, and these things, which would actually make you aware of what was going on around you. So it was not design. It was art borrowing from design to make an artistic impression on the people that were interacting with the works. And then I remember this talk very clearly because there was a design student in the audience who at the end of the talk asked, well, what is art? And everybody felt very embarrassed by the question.
The best question.
But then I thought that was actually a brilliant question, because if you're going to talk about the blurred lines between art and design, you better be able to define art and design. And that's the thing that I think the way I see it is design is a functionally designed thing, and art is something that is made with a different spirit. It's something that is made based on ideas that the artist has. Like, you were talking about materials, you were talking about, science and feeling. Those are the materials of an artist. Mm-hmm. They're not the materials of a designer.
Well, I think for me,
okay.
I think for me, one of the hierarchies that I've seen sort of on a practical level between design and art, and which gets at exactly what you're saying, is that there is, for whatever reason, impulse among a lot of designers to want their work at least displayed as artwork is displayed, right? So they want it in sort of a certain type of exhibition setting, that the way museums collect design is the way that they collect art, which I think renders the function meaningless, like this functional aspect meaningless, right? Like the second you put a typewriter in a vitrine, or it's brand new, it's not being used. So its function becomes as hypothetical as that of any artwork, which could become a doorstop or kindling, like as easily as anything else. So for me, I think that design is very uniquely positioned. And I love what you're saying about the artist who interrogate function in their work. I think that is no different than designers who interrogate function in their work. And it's interesting, exactly as you say, to see how in this post-disciplinary investigation, there's borrowing from the critical theory or the pedagogy of each particular discipline. And that informs sort of how even the intention is put forth. But has that been your experience?
I like what he said about borrowing, because design can also borrow from art, I've always held the distinction between art and design as the line is function, right? The design in my mind needs to function on some level or deal with function on some level. But doesn't mean there's not a lot of crossover. There always has been crossover, and there always has been borrowing, but people still want to put things in boxes, But if you really look at the people that are big visionaries, like Noguchi or Maya Lin, or there's no distinction, right? Or there is a distinction, but it doesn't mean you can't do all of it. It doesn't mean it can't come from the same place. You can approach it for this. So then it becomes about intention, right? Yeah. That's why I say I'm an artist and designer, because when I'm making art, I'm making art. When I'm making design, I'm making design, and they can inform and borrow from each other. But it is an important distinction. Architecture is architecture, design is design, photography is photography, art is art. And I think there is a hierarchy in the sense that art is purposely useless, right? That is a distinction, right? So in a way, people hold it as a higher regard because of that. It's because it has to be pure in that sense. But these definitions kind of become more and more irrelevant as we move away from this linear isms of the 20th century. You know what I mean?
You're looking at me because I find that hierarchy irritating.
Yeah. No, I know. I find it irritating too. That's what I
do. I do find it irritating because people think that because they call it art, it's going to be immediately something better.
Exactly. And it's a 20th century thing, I think.
Oh, it's actually a today thing. Like you go into a design fair and there's like this colorful cube that costs $100,000. Immediately, it's useless because you're not going to sit on a $100,000 stool. That means nothing in the end. So it's neither a work nor a design piece. So you can actually throw an object into a negative space of existence because it's neither useful nor interesting enough to be an artwork. You know what I mean? And the thing is that, as you say, they're two separate operations. Of course, I wouldn't say the art is purposefully useless, but I understand what you say. What you mean is more like it's not meant to be used in the way that things are used in the world, But at the same time, we need to remember that art as we understand it today, is a product of a certain institutional idea of the museum. It's not like the museum exists because art has always been like this. The way we understand art is the effect of the museum itself, this bringing together all these objects and elevating them to a standard that is like only comprehensible to few. All these things are a little bit absurd sometimes. But then from there, it developed a sense of art that is the one we operate within today, which is meant to, in a way, make us reflect on things. So, like when you look at modern art in general, like you can look at a Caravaggio and there's like a combination of pagan and Catholic themes, and they're competing with each other in the same painting. These things at the time would make you really reflect. And in fact, there is no real history of how we became monotheistic as a society in the world, it's like, but Caravaggio gets close to that. So that's an interesting thing about, and that's part of why it's appealing still today.
Mm-hmm.
We look at the painting and it's just arresting, but because they're still telling us something that we don't know yet, or we don't know how to put into words. And I think those are the things that art does.
But also, like I was talking when I was giving the walkthrough, is feeling. I like the ideas of feelings, and I get the same feeling when I discover art in a gallery or museum that I'm in awe of, as I do with a great piece of design. If I see a Ruhlmann piece at the Museum of Decorative Arts in the Louvre, I get the same feeling of awe. If I go into a great piece of architecture, it's the same feeling of awe. So for me, it's always been that way. That's the intrigue, that's the vision, that's the that's what I want to participate in. So I make what I make when I feel like making it, I guess. Based on those,
I mean, I was thinking when we were doing the walkthrough and you were talking about that intersection between your work and inquiries in physics and quantum mechanics, about the quasi-object and the theory of the quasi-object, right? And this idea that there's the material thing, right? The objective experience, and then there's that subjective experience of it. And that in physics often refers to, or in phenomenology, often refers to things like atmosphere, right? Or things that we know are there, like gravity, but that the experience of it is so subjective. But I think that also applies very much to art, right? And that, and I think that leads, to this question that I had, because I'm thinking of how you were talking about science and art and design. Do you think the successes or failures are, at least for you or in the approbation of it, are they the same in design and art? I mean, I would hesitate to say that if something fails to be functional, right? If it fails as design, then it could be an artwork, right? That seems like a stretch too far.
There's a lot of failed design that has opened the way for a lot of important design.
Yeah.
For example, and then you can look at Memphis, and it's just, most people find it hideous. I like it, but it's something you learn to like you learn to eat an onion or something. It's not the most pleasant thing to look at, but you start understanding why they were doing it, and then you get into it in a more intellectual way. And then there's design that just feels good,
Yeah.
But then, in terms of the feeling, there's a difference. I've been trying to think of a clear way of saying this. There's a difference between feeling that something is there, and just doing something because you feel like it. I don't know how to explain it clearly, but the feeling is like an intuition, and you're doing something intuitively because there is something there that needs to be exposed, and you're using whatever means you have at your disposal, as a scientist, as an artist, or a tennis player, whatever, to make it real.
Yeah.
It's not the same as painting your feelings, is what I mean.
Or that it's not the same as just thinking of a painting. No?
I mean, like, in the sense that these are my feelings, so you cannot criticize it. It's just not
Right.
engaging.
Yeah, but it's engaging. And for me, the feeling is just, everybody has their own unique feelings, right? Everybody approaches the works. People talk about the viewer completing the work and all that kind of stuff. For me, it's just, the most important moments in my life is the discovery and appreciation of art and architecture and design, and the feelings I get when I experience greatness through that. And so that's what I'm chasing, right? It's as simple as that. I'm chasing that to participate in my own way of that. So I'm chasing that feeling in a way, that's all it is. and you have failures and successes and mediums and different restraints and constrictions and but the intention is always there.
No, I don't mean to associate this with you. Was just making a distinction that I make between expressing your feelings and doing something because you feel something is there, and then you try to make it concrete and available to others so that others can participate in this discovery or something. Like this is
for me, it's more that that's like participating in the discovery. It's not about all about my feelings in the work, but it is how it feels in space. How it feels in a room, how it feels as a material, the smell,
Estoy hablando muy pasito.
Pardon.
Sorry.
No, and I think that is, that also, perhaps this is a very embryonic thought, so I'll let one of you sort of go with this. But I do feel like in design, there does need to be a physical object, right? That, and as you were saying, and I think that's a form of courage, right? I think that it has to be a presentation of a risk, whether or not that risk is necessarily novel, but it's a judgeable object. And as you were saying, that can be a failure, but that sort of in design, and because design is iterative in a way that art may necessarily not be.
So you mean in art there doesn't have to be? It's true.
It could be
true.
a thought. It could be a thought.
It
doesn't have to be a physical object.
I agree. There are artists who've only had thoughts and find ways to make them present in a non-material way, and that's actually I agree. You can't do that with design.
Yeah. I agree with that.
This, I think, also the things that sort of exist around art that maybe don't exist in as developed or as robust of a way around design. Sorry, I think I said that exist around art, but don't necessarily exist. The sort of critical theory.
But I think that's what happened in the last 20 years more and more is that the advent of what we call collectible design, right? And it being design galleries switching to like a white boxes and presenting.
What do you mean by collectible design, Brian?
I don't like that term, but it's the only term anybody could ever come up with this.
What does it mean?
I don't even like that term, but it's the term that people use to define. The way I would define it is like design that has the same intention as art, or it has like a table that can exist with the same presence as a sculpture, right? I think that's what it means. Like, and it can be collected and analyzed and thought about, and it can be more conceptual. I think that's where it comes from. And we all started participating in this idea of it being exhibited in galleries, even in MASA, even in my early career. But that's what I've started moving away from because, like you said before, you lose the context. The context becomes meaningless because it's not being used. My earliest works, the first show I ever did, it was a rubber credenza, right, with handles of soft rubber. So I was encouraging people to touch it, because it's meant to be tactile. It's meant to be used and discovered. So I've always liked that if you're going to use design, let it be used in a way. You know what I mean? There's obviously lots of nuance and different things within that, but yeah. Sorry, I don't know if that answered or if that was even a question, but.
I was just thinking, there was a moment where people collected design, a design that already existed and you wanted to have it. And recently it's like design purposely made for it being collected, and that's a weird thing for me. I don't get it. I don't understand it. But and then that was the extent of my thought. It's just expensive design.
I agree, and at the end of the day, it's like everything we're talking about is like these distinctions and rules and stuff that. It's part of the process of how things get developed and talked about and analyzed, but it's about intention. Who cares? Good is good. If it's good design, it's good design. If it's good art, it's good art. And finding unique ways to present it is what's becoming more and more interesting to me. So doing a gallery exhibition, I would struggle to do it to show function anymore. You know what I mean? Not that I would never do it, but it's when Age asked me if I wanted to do last year, she asked me if I wanted to do a show this year here, and then I got excited because it was really an opportunity to do a large presentation of only non-functional. Because presenting work in a functional work in a gallery doesn't feel it feels out of context to me nowadays, more and more.
Well, I mean, I think for me, the joy of having this conversation like we've been having for
Yeah, I mean, we've been
for
having this.
so many years about art and design with so many people in this room is that when you think about art through the lens of design, or vice versa, or craft, and even architecture, I'll throw all of that into it. You start to see the absurdities of
Exactly.
some of the deeply held beliefs,
Yeah.
right? Like what an absurdity when design is put in this out of context way. You see also the absurdity of exhibiting art in the way that we've always exhibited, as though it has this like arbitrary sense of permanence, no, or that this is how it's going to live forever. Even if that was the intention for the artist, that this was a unified thing. It's like, no, it's going to disappear into some collector's home or into some
Exactly.
storage. And it's like, this is not the context that is going to carry on with this artwork forever, right? Or even the sort of monumentality and these things. So you start to see at the edges, I think, what some of the deeply held beliefs are.
People don't remember anymore, but in the 90s, the big deal was art made for the white cube. It was like the wrong thing to do. Like now everybody makes art for the museum and the white cube, but back in the 90s, it was like you were selling out as an artist if you were making art for the white cube. So now it's like now they're making art for art fairs. It's just, I mean, but there's a progression in which these things can devolve into something unwanted.
Yeah.
And unnecessary, and then there's other ways in which you can actually, because I was now thinking, I don't know if this is a question that we can actually get into right now, but then where's the line between engineering and industrial design?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is, because is the industrial design just the outer shell of an engineering piece, or is it like is there a moment in which they have to, the industrial designer has to be an engineer and vice versa? I don't know why I was thinking of this. Obviously because of the stereos I was talking to you about, and thinking about these people toiling year after year to improve on something so minimal.
Yeah.
It's just get from here to here and then from here to here, and it's a big triumph and everybody can hear it. But now, then I started, but the outer design of these stereos remains the same. It's just almost unchanged, timeless. So it's like, where is this relationship between engineering and industrial design? Maybe you have an answer. I don't. I just came up with a question.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. My whole life, I've thought about these things in relation to what makes a good architect or an engineer. Like Calatrava is an engineer more than an architect, and which is why he goes in these wild, dramatic forms. But at the end of the day, it's like it doesn't really matter. Most of my favorite architects are not traditionally trained. It's just like having vision, having the work ethic, having like that's what matters at the end of the day, really, to have vision, and intention, and to execute and follow through, and sensibilities, just being okay with it, pushing through, what I mean? Those are the things that I admire most, that I always come back to,
I mean, I think for me, and maybe this gets at another possible distinction. I'll float this, right? I'm like, I think that one of the things I'm really trying to work on personally, this is just like my little therapy moment, is that like, I think that as curators, we're often trained to like present things really like with a lot of certainty and with a lot of rhetorical persuasion. So I would like to float this idea as like as a proposition. I think that for me, at least, if we're talking about what is collectible design and its distinction from engineering or from industrial design, and where collectible design, despite being like a completely heinous term, where it rubs up against art is in this question of a value system of efficiency versus excess. So that you see within design sort of these directions, right? Like, and one direction is to try to make something as efficiently, as inexpensively, and it's not like a handmade distinction. Sometimes the cheapest way to make something, sometimes the cheapest way to make something is through human labor in a factory somewhere. And then the other direction is in sort of this excess of attention and care that goes into the making of something that exceeds its usefulness. Right? I think that's where design sort of veers into that. It's like all of this unnecessary labor, all of this unnecessary deliberation that goes into a piece. And that, I mean, this is also like a complete veering, but that unnecessary labor and deliberation is part of what goes into the valuation of a piece of collectible design. I think it's been misunderstood as the handmade versus the mass-produced, but I don't think that. I think there are mass-produced things that are very thoughtful in their decision making about what is excess and what is efficiency and what trade-offs there are there. But I think that might be a possible area where design has adopted some possibilities from art about what am I trying to say? About the valence that surrounds the object that is not necessarily within the object itself. I mean, as someone who as you have this experience coming from fabrication, I think that, and I feel like, one thing that I really do wish that more people who wrote about art and design, and I love that you have this background in studio art, also had some experience in trying to make it, right? Because that just feels like a sort of basic consideration that you kind of know, what the difficulty is. Yeah. And you see that in the other direction, no? Like you see this in this direction where there are all of these artist curated exhibitions, right? Like now there's that MoMA series, like artist picks or artist selects, or you have this long history of sort of curators that were artists, but maybe for me it's strange that in this other direction that it doesn't exist so much, that there are not now sort of really professional curators that also are making a go at being a designer or an artist. I mean, maybe it would be the worst show ever. This is in my annals of terrible show ideas. I'm a chair show of chairs designed by curators.
But I think that's the beauty of all of it, is when you're learning and you're young, as a lot of curators started in literature or as artists became writers, Jerry Saltz, crossing these platforms, it's the only way to figure out what you want to do. My shift from art to design and architecture when I was 25, it just became more interesting to me. And then I shifted back and forth over the last 30 years. But that's how you learn, right? Is shifting from discipline to discipline, you know what I mean? And technique to technique. And, you just have to take it all in and decide what lands, you know what I mean? That's why going through experiences and having vision and drive and work ethic to find those things is kind of what matters, wherever it lands, you know what I mean?
I mean, it's something that I've seen in the conversation among, right? It's that sort of conversation among artists versus the conversation between an artist and a curator. Also, it sometimes happens is that and this I think happens more, for those of us who sort of specialize in craft in that area, right? That sometimes you have this conversation among artists and they're this was so hard to make. Or I can see how hard this was to make. And I'm for a curator, I'm this matters not at all. Unfortunately, right? But there is that sort of technical aspect within the conversation that which I think is this is neither good nor bad. No, it's just a curator sort of on their own journey of what is meaningful sometimes.
I think a big part of it, no matter what the discipline is to remember not to take it so seriously. Yeah. That's why playfulness and not taking it too seriously.
And be generous.
No, but be generous and not it's supposed to be fun. I mean, we're doing this so we don't have to work, we're doing this to have fun and make our lives interesting and serious and, but I think the people that do it throughout their whole careers, right? To me, the body of work throughout a career is what's kind of always been a goal of mine, it's not any one thing. It's creating languages and dialogues in between things, and what comes out after 30 years is what's interesting to look at for me, if you approach it with that, it becomes more fun and loose and freedom and exploration and, yeah. And so the playfulness is, I think, a big part of who when people do it the most successfully, in my mind, are the ones that don't take it too seriously, and have a playful side to it, and a human side.
I mean, I don't mean to set sort of like a time lineage on this, but I feel like, Juan, you've been really influential in sort of thinking of an installation or a biennial that has a non-hierarchical organization between different types of objects, and objects that sort of cross historical periods also. Exactly, exactly. And I'm
Just a simple idea that if people didn't like the contemporary art show, they could just visit the other galleries and see ethnographic art or whatever else there was in the museum in Dahlem. And it was, so, like people, artists wanted to do interventions. And I was like, refused. I was like, no, there are galleries for contemporary art and the rest is the museum. And if people don't like contemporary art, they can just drift away. And some people were irritated because they were lost. Some guy wrote that he had been lost in the Islamic art section. I was like, well, if you were lost, you are lost, because somehow it's a wonderful section to look at. I mean, you could just enjoy it, but no, he was miffed that he couldn't get out of the Islamic art section.
Yeah.
But yeah, I get your point. It was fun to do. There was like a last minute show I did where I picked everything up by car from really, really big artists. And I convinced them to let me, because it's impossible, like when you work with art, you do use proper shippers and insurance and all these things. So, like or you talk to the artist and you're like, I'm going to just drive up to your studio. I'm going to pick up something and I'm going to hang it myself. And they were all game. It was just the institutional thing in between was really stressed because they didn't like the idea that those works could potentially get lost or go uninsured. But the artists understood the joke. It was not a joke, the gesture, and they went with it.
No, we did that with MASA early on when the first shows that she curated. It was like, the artists were all game, to do design, to mix the two, it was the institutions and the galleries that that were scared of it, but the artists and designers didn't care, you know what I mean? And we didn't know if it was going to work. We just wanted to see what would happen, But yeah, that idea just to see what happens and see what comes out, that's what's interesting. I don't know if it's going to work or not. Maybe it's terrible. Maybe it's going to be great. And, you don't know until you do it.
And that's certainly something that's been a bleeding out of from art into other disciplines, is this idea of the preciousness of an object also, right? And I feel like that's really an interesting thing.
No, it's also like you have to take it seriously. There has to be a preciousness. You have to take the playfulness seriously,
I mean, you have to know that you're putting something out there that is meaningful enough that others should give it their time. It's not just put whatever and let people do whatever.
And really spend time on it. I mean, I spend especially early on with my design works. I always felt like the longer I have, like throughout my design career, most of my works are born from special commissions for clients. So I'm designing and building something for a client for a specific space. Those to me where the best ideas come from. And then I can build off those to then show other works in other spaces based on that. So that's often where the best works come from. And so I kind of lost my train of thought, but so throughout my design career, that's kind of where it came from. But it's so the preciousness, is like, it really takes, so that's what I was talking about, is the time. So if you give me 6 months to design something, it's going to be better than a 6-week design, right? It's like, in a lot of ways, generally.
Sometimes 1 year design might actually be terrible.
But there's a limit. That's what I'm getting at. Like a 10-year design is a waste of time, right? And sometimes you have an aha moment. Sometimes I have an aha moment and I have something beautiful in 5 minutes. But in general, taking it seriously in terms of putting in the time, analyzing it. So even with the art, I don't do that much like sketching. I do a lot of thinking, you know what I mean? For me, it's like the thinking is all the process. And then once I have the thought or the idea, then I just execute, right? But the thinking is really what what informs me. And that's not for everybody, you know. I came up in a place where you have to know how to draw, you have to know how to do this, you have to know that. And I always kind of fought against that. And to me, the thinking is everything. You know, I don't know if that's, I'm kind of all over the place, but.
No, but I think that that's amazing. Like, that's so fascinating to me, right? Because that seems like in this, if there's this possibility of the object being a part of this process that is, for most of the time, is the thinking or this lifetime of experience or all of these things, or the other inquiry that is like later on, or the failure or whatever it is, that the object itself is like, you know, like maybe we've like in design sort of adopted this preciousness of the object, when what we should be adopting is the preciousness of this sort of like process and this thought around
the history,
and the like, and having design creators who are not just historical you know, like, I mean, all of that's very important because that creates a validation, but like this idea that there can be a real critical discourse around design, and that's a valuable part of the process. And I think that that gets into a lot of this like conversation around AI also, right? It's like, this is something that I've been thinking about just to veer a little bit more even. I'm like, which is that, like, you know, as this has like come up a few times in the last year, right? Where it's like someone has sent me like someone who has gone on, who will go unnamed, has sent me like a text and been like, look, I'm like taking a pass at an artist text. I fed it into AI. It's like, you know, it's this, I like gave it some samples of writing, including yours, and I'm like, oh, thank you. And then it's like, you know, and what comes back is actually really like quite like on a sentence level, not bad. No, it's like really like it's a well constructed whatever text. But it's this question, I think, of like not whether we need curators or writers to write about the art, but if we need them to think about it. No, like if we need people who are thinking about these processes to be in that conversation, or if it's only this object, this result, this press release, right, or this text that is the thing, that is that person's contribution to like what it means to be.
I think it's all of the above. You know, some artists don't want to participate in that at all, and the art is the only thing that matters, and others write essays and books and curate shows, and both are wonderful. You know that. You know what I mean. Like, I don't know if that's not to answer a question, but that's always my approach in that sense. It's like,
no, I don't. I think that
all of those options.
Nothing works.
In the 1950s, an artist would write a grand proposal saying, like Jackson Pollock would literally say, I'm going to paint a 3-meter by 10-meter painting, and it's going to be black, red, and green. And that's it. That was his proposal, and he would get the money.
Yeah.
You know, like now we'll forget it. Now you get 50 pages of grand proposal writing to make something as an artist is just stifling, in my opinion. I mean, and I think that, you know, this has produced a situation where most art is over-explained to the point where you have to filter any experience through all these lines of text that are mostly unreadable. Really.
Which I struggle with.
It's just so boring to read. But, you know, like you have to go through that to get to the work, and I don't see why. I mean, like it should be, in my, you know, ideal situation, that people just look at the work first. And then compare to somebody else's thoughts about it. But no, everybody needs to read it first, and then you have a preconceived explanation or interpretation of the work, you know. And
that's a huge thing that I've always struggled with, especially with this show, probably more than any other, is how much to talk about it. I really struggle with how much to explain, because I like giving people context, especially in this thing. We're actually here to talk about it. But it's most important, first and foremost, that the work exists as itself and you can experience it without knowing anything, you know what I mean? And make your own interpretation. So it's something I really struggle with, is how much to talk about it, because I appreciate the need to just experience it purely, but I also appreciate having a discourse, you know? So I don't like to always so that's like that balance of over-explaining or how much to talk, you know? It's an interesting thing. And I used to scare me. I used to struggle with it, but now I kind of am learning to embrace it because there's the freedom in it. Like, see what happens. Maybe each exhibition I do, I learn more about how to talk about it. You know what I mean? Or how much to say, or how little to say.
Just sometimes you have a book and you wish it was only one sentence long.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have a very short story and you wish it was like 500 pages.
Yeah.
It just depends on
Exactly.
what you'd have to say and how.
And that's the beauty of it. It depends on context, depends on your place in the world, depends on your time in your life. It depends on, and that's the beauty, So getting rid of the fear of it is a big thing for me.
There was just another one of those like lamenting the death of criticism essays. I think it was in Art Review. It was Catherine Wagley. And it was, I mean, she had this like this very interesting take on what had been lost in art criticism, which was the capacity of critics to describe the artwork.
Yeah.
Which I was like, what?
I saw it as an art historian. Art history students cannot look at a work without feeling panic. I mean, they don't know how to look at a work and just have their own thoughts about it and not panic about it.
Right,
it's really remarkable.
Can you say what, I mean, that seems like that would be a fun drinking game, though, where it's like you can't describe an artwork, guess the artist. You can't say the gender or the country of origin, but you have to describe an piece of art.
It's a great exercise that I actually did put to my students in art history to describe a work. Just describe in 2 paragraphs, describe what you see. And it's an amazing exercise that everybody should do because it's so much fun and so hard. It's very hard to describe, even a table. It's black, it's organic. How do you explain the oval, not oval shape, the curtain and then you have to transmit this image. Mm-hmm. And it's almost impossible. Yep. But it's a good, nice, elegant exercise to try.
I love that. I wish I was a student in one of your classes. I think we're going to open it up to questions now. So thank you so much. Unless there's anything you want to add? Thank you so much, both of you. I'm like...
we could do this all day.
Just to go back to the origin of the conversation, and this kind of almost complex between design and art, and what is art, what is design, and I was just thinking of what people used to say, this is not art, thinking of abstract minimalism or ready-made, or even technique itself, saying performance art is not art, or video art is not art, and now it's all accepted as part of art in general, this big umbrella, and that maybe now is a time that collectible design is almost like that last frontier before being accepted as part of art. I was thinking of about 20 years ago, Tino Segal, a great performance artist, was asked by a collector because he only produced this very performance art, nothing tangible. But the collector wanted to own something from Tino Segal, in a way, in its place, permanently. And what Tino Segal did is he moved the wall of his apartment 1 meter less. So that guy lost 10 square meter, and that's what the action, and that's what he collected. And for people to accept the idea okay, this is art. I lost 10 square meter of my apartment. So I wanted to just thought on do you think, instead of questioning maybe is design and art are so different because of one is tangible or one is functional and the other is not, and maybe we're just at the last frontier of collectible design being part of the art.
Sometimes I think function is one of the frontiers that's not been explored with the same rigor as any other ism in art, right? I do think there is a weird frontier in there that's interesting. It's not a rule, but there's something interesting in that function hasn't been picked apart in the same way as art, all the different isms in art have picked at art, so I don't think it's gone through that process. And so then now we are going through that, I think, in some ways. If that makes any sense.
I'm going to sound like
a curator.
I don't think there is a place for design in art or vice versa.
I'm not saying that there is.
No, no. I'm just
Sorry.
I'm just answering. Not arguing. I'm not arguing. I think that they're two completely different operations. So when Tino did that, yes, he moved a wall. It was a physical situation, but it was the best way he could find to make a intangible thing very present. So basically, yes, you lost some space, but actually he completely transformed the space of the apartment. And what that also means is that if he takes out that wall, the work disappears. It's just not there anymore. And and but he has a certificate like with Tino where he can reproduce it somewhere else. But if it is somewhere else, Tino has to come and decide which wall of the apartment. So it's not really a functional intervention. It's in my opinion, an artistic intervention in the sense that the way you have to reflect on it and interact with it is not about whether it works or not. Those are not the parameters of. So collectible design for me is more this idea that you pay more for something, you know, like literally. I don't think it's much more than that. I mean, some of it is really complicated and expensive to produce. But like for example, this F1 table that Established and Sons made. It's super expensive, but they don't consider it a collectible design piece. It's just a table.
Yeah.
For them, it's not a collectible design piece. So collectible design for me is like, carpenter's workshop doing funky things that look artistic but are expensive. That's what I see. So that's why I was saying, forgive me for what I'm about to say. Politely or not politely, I don't think that it has ever any place in art because it's just like a lot of art. It's like designed things that look like art to me and and are not art in my opinion because they're not generous. They're not there to make you think and reflect and have an experience about something. They're just there to look like art, and then you have to accept it as such. But it's not something that I find particularly engaging. There's a lot of that too. So I would say that there's designed art. There's artworks that are designed to look like art, and there's design that is made to look like artworks. But it's just sort of like two completely. I wouldn't say they're moving closer and closer, except if you look at it from a collector's point of view. Maybe they do because it's relevant that you pay for something that is going to be worth more at the other end, in art. And I guess that's where the collectible design thing is hopefully for them headed, where people invest in design rather than just buy things. Is that more or less?
I mean, I both agree and disagree. I think that I agree with the unfortunate overlap being articulated as a market-driven one.
Yeah.
But I do think that one of the enduring questions of our time is something that art has adopted from design, which is how do we ascribe importance or value or reason to exist based on, or worth, based on function, usefulness. And I think that applies also to human endeavor. And I think that's an ongoing question of what it means to be alive. Like, do we have a right to exist as humans if we're useful, right? If we fulfill some sort of function? I think design has a long history, despite there being maybe an underdeveloped discourse.
But I'm not being critical of design. I actually said there's lots of amazing designs that are expensive, but are not presented to you as collectible design. So for example,
that's why we don't like this term because I like design. I like the idea that a table can exist in a space with the same presence as a sculpture, if that makes sense, right? Like a coffee table.
yeah, but they don't have the same.
But it doesn't. I'm not calling it sculpture. I'm not calling it sculpture. I'm just saying I like that it
That's
can
the point.
exist in a space like this that doesn't need to just be a wood top with four legs. Like it can exist in a space that brings dynamics to that space. It's not about value. It's not about market driven. It's just what an exploration of materials and space. And sometimes that comes through in design. For me personally, sometimes that comes through in design. Sometimes that comes through in sculpture. But I like the idea that architecture can create wonder in space the same, is it Terrell Sky Space architecture or art? You know what I mean? Like I like those moments, but yeah, the market driven, the collectible design, making fancy things that look like art, is not
Okay,
what I'm interested in.
I'll do an opposite example so that I don't sound like I'm partial. Theaster Gates did this tea shop for Prada, and it looks pretty, but it's not an artwork. It looks amazing, and I like Theaster. He's great, but that's not an artwork. That's actually an artist designing a space for Micha Prada. It's fine. It's fine as long as they don't sell it as an artwork, because for me, it's not in any way. It doesn't matter where he sources the teas or whatever. It's just not the same because it's a tea shop. Well-designed tea shop by Theaster Gates, which is fine. But then you have these clubs that Karsten Holler designed for Prada, where one was a hut and next to it was a restaurant, and next to a Moroccan restaurant, and then there was this like weird dancing place. It was so awkward to be in there, but that was the thing, and that is.
Why are Theaster Gates pieces? I mean, I instinctually agree with you, but I would like to hear the articulation. Why are Theaster Gates tea bowls not artworks?
I just.
No, but the thing I wanted to say, like, but this is the perfect example of what I've been trying to say. And like, in a way, these distinctions are important, but also, who cares? I like Theaster Gates because a big vision and likes to do whatever he likes to do. And he's going to do a tea house, and he's going to do these kind of minimalist paintings out of fire hoses or what. Like, the beauty of him is that it doesn't fucking matter. You know what I mean? That's what I like. So yeah, I agree that it's not. I instinctually agree that it's not art. That tea house, tea ceremony, whatever, is not art in the way that you could just sell it as art. It's just somebody exploring.
It's not the way.
things.
The way you're going to interact with it is not like with an artwork. It's with a tea shop.
Exactly, it's just the tea shop. That's it.
I mean, I think this contention only exists because Theaster Gates also has what we would consider an art practice. Right? Like if he does not have what we consider to be a fine art practice as opposed to an architecture practice, then there is no contention about whether or not these tea bowls could possibly exist as artworks. And I think that possibility is also open to designers, right? Like if they are designers working within these questions that are also there for artists, that overlap should be as available.
Yeah, but it goes back to what we were saying. It's like the artists don't care. It's the institutions that care. It's the galleries and the art world. The art world is trying to define it.
They care.
No, I know they care about what they're doing, but I'm saying they're not the ones trying to. Theaster Gates isn't trying to define it as art or value, or it's huh?
I mean, I think
He's analyzing it. He's talking about it, but it's not.
I think our experience with MASA, and I love having this conversation, and I love that it's heated because, Chris, the very heatedness reflects that people do care. And this has been the ongoing challenge of MASA. And I mean this not in like a way that doesn't make sense, right? There are, of course, practical considerations to what it means to self-description or to how you present yourself in the world. But there is an ongoing challenge with MASA, at least initially, right? I think we've done some work in this direction where you approach someone and you say, you're making work that really addresses function. And that is also what someone coming from a design background is doing. And the work looks very different, but it has the same sort of conceptual valence to it. And yet at the same time, an artist, and this has happened to me, right? An artist is like, I really don't want to be associated with design. Or they only want to be associated with design when their career is sort of flagging and they think it's like a good moneymaker and they can do it. And I mean this seriously. I think that someone who does not have a design background is as likely, like an artist is as likely to make a horrible, horrible design object as vice versa. And we've also experienced that, right? That there are real differences in the capacity to think through each medium. But that overlap space, I agree with you that the overlap space is really unfortunate, that it's been defined as this market thing. And I think that is a reflection of a hierarchy where designers have thought, in order to be taken seriously, I must be exhibited as an artist, I must be represented as an artist, I must be priced as an artist. And I don't think that's necessarily always the case, no? And that's the unfortunate side effect of this hierarchy existing, whether we like it to or not. As much as we might like to say that the distinction doesn't matter, but it does matter practically. But I do feel like there is a different space of overlap that you're defining really beautifully, right? And that different space of overlap is not necessarily one around how the market values things, or necessarily how even something looks, right? Like, I think you're really right that how something looks being the pure space of overlap between two disparate objects is not like this could look like this, but they're not the same thing. That we understand from the ready-made. That is a sort of long understanding. But I do think that there is a space of overlap in thinking about how we value and consider objects in relationship to whether or not they contribute something to human existence and whether or not that's important. And that extends, right? That is such a big theme in our thinking about the use of non-sentient or non-human sentience, and our thinking of, there's a much larger, broader consideration, I think, of use, function, and value that design and art are uniquely positioned in their overlapping space to address. And you had a comment, and I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm just like curious. Should I continue and ask? Because I think it might open like another.
Please.
Another fight. We like fighting.
Well, we've been talking about a lot of things, circumstantial things. This could happen, but this could also happen. I'm just curious about what are the non-negotiable qualities? What makes art art? Thank you.
I mean, I don't know. I don't want to answer because
No, I think it's agreement. I mean, I really think it's as simple as that. What makes art is agreement.
I don't think
Yeah.
so. I think art has a function. Like philosophy has a function, literature has a function, design has a function. There are different functions in our social world and cultural world, and each one of those functions is relevant, and objects made within that function should be looked at and perceived from that perspective. That's why I was saying at the beginning, when I see this, I have to look at it from the point of view of art, not from the point of view of design, because it's not giving me any elements of design to work with, and it's giving me all these elements of art to work with. And in the case of Theater Gates, I was not diminishing the thing by saying that it's not an artwork. I'm just saying it is a museum-like tea shop that is very interesting. I like it. I'm just not going to look at it from the point of view of art. I'm going to look at it from a different perspective.
Sure.
I'm not what that is. Doesn't matter, but it's not that I think it's lesser because it's not considered an artwork. I just think it exists in a different plane for a different set of reasons, and our relationship to it changes. Like you look at a painting, and what are you supposed to get out of the painting? Like whatever it is that you get out of it. Sort of. You look at a Rothko, and it makes you move forward and back and forward and back, like they kind of do. It's an exciting thing, and it's just how you reflect on that relationship that the painting establishes with you that is interesting. It's not the same with design. In a certain way, design is meant to be appreciated from the point of view of functionality, how it's used, where it fits in the order of usable or useful things in the world. And sometimes it might not be useful, but it's still designed for some reason, like it could be decorative, whatever, but it's not art because it's not establishing this kind of. That's what I don't know how to use.
I disagree so strongly.
Why?
Because I think that the perspective that you're offering can be true in a static moment, but that shifts constantly, right? So that an artwork, as you're defining it, may absolutely be that way in our historical moment, in an instant, in whatever it is, but that, if the apocalypse comes tomorrow, that painting is going to be more valuable as like a It's firewood or like a blanket, no? Like, and so the idea that an art object has some inherent value,
No, not inherent.
not inherent. What is so the term I'm looking for, the idea that an art object has a static association surrounding it, I think is something that design also does not fall into, right? The idea that a design object does not have a static value attached to it, right? That something could be useful now. Maybe it was designed intentionally to be useful and then fails at it, right? Maybe it breaks. And then that object has a completely different value. And I think that is sort of like a longer time, like,
Yeah, but we're looking at them from our point of view, not from a potential future in which, we don't understand art.
certain future.
It's just,
It's an absolutely certain future.
no, it's not a
It's like
certain
it's
future.
a
How do
future
you
where
know?
we don't exist.
We don't know.
We have more examples of objects
I mean,
that were perhaps once artworks and that are now seen as artifacts, or that were perhaps once design objects that are now seen as symbolic objects, than we have of contemporary art. No, there's a longer lineage of that. So I feel like the idea, what you're saying, I think is absolutely true, but is a very static idea of, and based with a lot of generosity to an artist's intention.
I don't think it's static.
But how can it be? Maybe it's not
It
static.
establishes a different relationship between you and the thing, the artwork and the design object. They
Yeah,
just
but what he's describing is how he likes to approach the work. Like he approaches my work, this show as
If I look at
from the-
if I look at
That's just
your
how he wants to
if I look
approach.
at your work from as if it's the work of a designer, I would go like, well, with the exception of the rubber floor, I don't get it.
Yeah.
I won't get it. I don't
You
see
approach,
why-
This
you might want to approach differently.
But this is why I say that art is agreement.
Yeah,
It's in that moment.
Well, that's
If
what
we
we're all
agree that it's
saying.
artwork,
I mean, for me to answer her question about what's non-negotiable is an intention. As a designer and artist, it's like me having an intention is what's non-negotiable, and maybe beauty. So for me personally, finding beauty. But those are really the only non-negotiables in my mind. Everything else is up to interpretation and freedom of expression. And it's not about aesthetic, not just aesthetic beauty. I just mean beauty, wonder, awe. All these things is what. That part of it is non-negotiable to me to maintain some of that for myself and having an intention.
I think art also.
Everything else is up to approach and distinction and.
I do largely agree with you, and the reason why I do agree, the way in which, no, but the way in which I mean, the way in where we have agreements is that I do think that art has a special category where it is possible to say, I don't like it, it's not art. And I don't think that's true of any other category. Like, I don't think you would say, like, I don't like this, it's not a chair. It's just it's still a chair. But I feel like that isn't, it's poor design. It's like it doesn't function, right? I think that that is a very interesting, I think that our preference, right? Our preference in art matters.
I'm just being.
No. I think that's a very interesting thing, that whether or not we personally have that engagement with it categorically determines it.
I'll take that. But just in your previous answer, Juan, you said something. You compared two works, both commissioned by Prada, and one was a Carsten Oller social club in East London, and you said this is art, but this Prada tea house is not. And I'm sure you would consider like Recreate do serving curry outside of a museum is also art. It's like, but don't you? I don't know. It really echoes what Sue just said. It's really about agreement or your own judgment about like, yeah, okay, this social club was weird. That's what you say, and so therefore it's art.
No.
But this other.
Fair enough. I mean, I might change my mind about the Theastergates thing. I haven't seen it in person. But it was just an example so that I didn't seem like I was only attacking design as inferior, because that was not the point. The point was that some things exist as design and some things exist as art, and they establish a relationship with you as a viewer, and that relationship is dictated by the object. Like if it's a painting, you're looking at art. If it's a chair, you're looking at design. And within that, there is a wide range of things that can happen. but I don't think we should think that design can be an artwork or art should be treated as design. They're two completely different operations. Both exist. Both are culturally agreed upon. You know, we agree on what design is, what art is. Of course, you're right, but it's just the way we interact with those things that is interesting to me. And I'm not going to dismiss one because it's not art. I just don't like it when something pretends to be art, when it clearly doesn't have the enough substance to be perceived from that point of view, or it fails in that it looks just too naive in relation to everything we know about art. You have to really know what's going on in design to make a good design, in art to make good art, because that's the reference we have in our minds. You know, like, and then, so if you look at something, it's just like literature, you know, you can read a book and sometimes it's amazing. You know, you read a sentence that just stops you. And sometimes you read it and it's like written by ChatGPT. It's not interesting. I mean, it's just kind of, but doesn't mean it's not literature. It's just not in the realm of literature that we want to engage with. I guess that's the point. So
So the batteries are determining our.
that's it. Kinda, we can't. I can't.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all so much.